Alright, here's one we've all been waiting for. This is going to be my Baby Gonga. This is my favorite streamer to fish. It's a small articulated fly, so while everybody else is kind of going big, 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 I threw a lot of big articulated stuff and it works. But it gets a lot of follows and not always gets eaten. So I wanted to start playing with something that was a little smaller, and that's where this Baby Gonga came from. It's really the same fly as the Big Gonga, a couple little variations on the theme, but we're going to start off. This is tied on a 52-62. This is a size 8, and both hooks in this case on this fly are the same size. So I'm going to start with 52-62 size 8. I've got some Danville 3/0 MONOCORD, and I'm going to start this thread just up here behind the eye. And the back end of this fly is really just a woolly bugger, nothing special to it. I'm just going to dress the hook all the way back to the bend. Alright, for the tail we're going to use some some tan MARABOU. We're going to tie what I call a tallow colored Baby Gonga. So you can see this feather doesn't have a tip. It's not a big deal. I'm going to bundle that up into a little bunch there and just thumbnail that off, so I've got a nice neat little bundle. And I'll measure that clump. It's about not quite a shank length long. I'm going to tie that in at the bend, just a little narrow band of thread, so just a short little tuft there. Now I'm going to take a yellow MARABOU feather, and it just so happens that I have one that doesn't have a tip in it either, so I'm going to use this one the same way. I'm going to bundle it up so that I've got a squarish tip, and I'm going to even that up with the tan, pinch that in on top, and tie it in with a band as well. Now the reason I put the yellow on top is when I'm fishing this fly, that yellow shows up nicely in the water and I can see it. So that's purely selfish on my part. It's just so that I can see the fly. Now I'm going to lift these butt ends up. I'm going to bring the thread to just short of the hook eye, and I'll lay them back down again and then catch them with a couple of turns. And what that's going to do for me is help use those butt ends to build some of the underbody so that I don't have to use quite so much dubbing to do it. And I'll just spiral back and forth here just to anchor all that in place. Alright, so nothing fancy just yet. Now the hackle on this is going to be a hen saddle feather. These are relatively small flies, so they don't take a real long feather to manage this maneuver. But that, as hen saddle feathers go, is a relatively long one. And what I want to do is I'm going to strip some of the fluff off the base of the feather, but I want to leave some on there. I want some of that MARABOU style fluff there. And then at the tip end I'm going to create a separation point and stroke the fibers back against their grain like so. Now that side of the feather that you're looking at is the inside, and I want to tie the feather in with the inside toward the hook. Now, one of the things on a fly like this, a woolly bugger, something as simple as that, when you're tying a feather in by the tip, I don't want to tie it in exactly at that separation point, just by that thin bare stem. What I want to do here is I'm going to bump my thread forward a bit. I want to catch the tip of the feather, and I'll get a couple turns on here and turn this. You can see that that separation point is short of the hook bend. I want to be able to wrap back over some of these fibers to make a little bit more secure tie down. So I'm going to come back right up to the base of the tail. I'll give you that view again so you can see I'm right up to the base of that separation point, and then past it a little bit. I'll come forward over that tip and trim those pieces out. Make sure you get all those. If you left any of those little hackle fibers sticking out right there, you won't catch any fish, so don't do that. I'm going to take some light yellow UV ice dubbing, and it's not going to take much. We've got most of the bulk that we need on the hook already there. I'll put just a little dubbing wax on my fingers, and this is going to be what's called direct dubbing. So what I've done here is I've just started the dubbing on the thread. I've got a big clump here in my fingers. I've just started the dubbing on the thread. I'm going to hold on to the dubbing and I'm going to twist the thread around the hook. And as that dubbing that I've started to twist catches on the hook, I'll kind of work my way back here toward the bend. And you can see as I do that, I'll sort of slide my fingers down that dubbing, and each time I wrap around the hook, that dubbing twists around the thread. So this is a really quick, easy way to dub a fat-bodied fly like this without having to apply 6 inches of dubbing and wrap and 6 more inches of dubbing and wrap. You can see I got a nice shaggy body out of that. So now I'm going to pick up my hen feather, and you guys are looking at the inside. I'm going to wet my fingers and I'm going to fold this hackle back toward the bend. My fingers will be on the screen here in a minute. So creasing everything wet fly style back toward the bend. You can see I'm sort of working my fingers up and down on those fibers. I like to work them sort of against their natural grain. That gives it a more secure fold. And I'll sort of hold them back there and start my first turn. You can see I'll just sweep back as I go. Fairly open spirals. Even with the long hen feather like this, you're not going to get a lot of extra length. So fairly open spirals. And then when I get to the front, I'm going to take a couple turns, one right in front of the other. And that's where that marabou fluffy base of that feather is going to come in. You can see that's built a nice thick collar there. And I'll tie off just on that bare stem. And that's why I stripped that, so that I had bare stem to tie off on. If I'd left the fluff on there, I have a much bulkier tie off. So I'll come in and trim that stem out. And now I want to build a thread head. And I do oversize the thread head just a bit. I could have made that very small, but I do want to oversize it. That's going to help with our articulation here in a minute. And then I'll come in and whip finish right on top. Trim my thread out. You can take a dubbing brush and kind of sweep all that hackle back. The idea of this fly, of building a fly this way, as simple as this is with a woolly bugger style body, you can see the outside diameter, this diameter of this fly. That's our body. Our hackle is really our body. The dubbing on the inside is just some flash. This hackle is what's building our outside profile. It's funny if you look at flies like the Game Changer, a great example. Very specific material that Blaine came up with to build up the body of that fly with the Game Changer chenille, etc. And then sort of circled back around and came back to the feathered Game Changer, which is the natural version. You can see how big that outside diameter gets. Feathers are tough to get around. There's not many things that work as well for what we're doing as feathers. So as I sweep that all back, you can see we got a nicely tapered body. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a little shot of Solarez. This is the ultra thin, and I'm just going to cement this head. Try not to get it in the hook eye. Put a little coat of that on there. These flies do take a minute to tie, so I usually toughen them up with a coat of head cement and resin, etc. as I tie. So that's the back end of the fly. Now, while it's sitting in the vise, I'm going to show you the first step of the articulation for this. So I'm going to take this is 30-pound stealth braid spider wire. And what I'll do here, so I'm going to take a length of this, and the way to cut this stuff is fold it over. It's very hard to cut with your scissors, even if your scissors are very sharp. It's very hard to cut. So what you want to do is fold it over and just push your scissors through it. You can see how I got a nice clean cut there. And I've cut, 3-4 inches. So I'm going to sweep those ends so that they're nice and tight and make a loop. And I try to get those two ends so that they're as even as I can get them. I'm going to take this loop and push it back over the hook eye, and then push those two ends up through the eye, like so. Now I'm going to grab this loop and get it all up out of my hackle, and slide that down right behind the hook eye. That's going to form a girth hitch, like so. Now I'm going to add, in the case of this little Baby Gonga, 2 gold 6/0 glass beads. So what I'll do is I'll take these two ends and slide both of them through the beads. Slide the beads right down to the hook eye. One of the nice things about this spider wire is it's sort of malleable, so if I pull those two ends apart, they'll stay there. So when I set this down on my desk, those beads won't fall off. So I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to pick up my front hook, which is this same model, 5262 size 8, and I'm going to put it in the vise upside down. I'm going to take that same thread, and I'm going to dress about the front third or so of the hook shank here. Now as you do this with the hook point sticking up, be aware that as you slide your fingers back and forth here, that hook point is waiting for you like a snake. So don't say I didn't warn you. I'm going to grab a set of, these are painted yellow, what are these called? Double pupil lead eyes. These are from Hairline, and these are really nicely made eyes. So they're lead eyes. These are size small for this fly. I'm going to use yellow ones. You can use whatever color you want. But I'm going to take these and set them in behind the eye here on the underside of the shank. I'm going to make 8 or 10 turns. And what I'm trying to do there, let me turn that so you can see, is cover the handle part of that barbell with a band of thread. Then I'm going to square these up on the hook and go the other direction. And again, I'm sort of concentrating. This will show a little bit better now that I've got this locked down. I want to cover that barbell. I don't want a nice tight X like I would with if I was doing hair wings. I want to spread those thread wraps out so that they make a good solid foundation for these eyes and lock them into place. So I'll go back and forth, back to front, several turns, front to back, several turns, Xing those on good and tight, and then I'm going to take about a half dozen turns between the eyes and the hook shank. These parachute style wraps here, anchor those wraps down so that those eyes are locked in good and tight. Now I'll take my hook and turn it right side up, and my eyes are on the bottom side of the shank. Now the reason I put the eyes on the bottom side of the shank is I want this fly to ride with the hook point down. I've had too many times with the hook point up, even a little fish will eat a big articulated streamer, and with that hook point up, it brains them. It goes right through the roof of their mouth into their brain. And I feel bad about that, so I like to tie them with the hook point down. That's the way I do it. If you don't feel bad about braining a fish every now and again, or you want to sack one, by all means, put that hook point up. It does decrease the fight, though, I'll tell you that. At any rate, do whatever you want. That's why I do it. So now I've got this thread base wrapped all the way back to the bend of the hook, and I'm going to cross hatch forward again and back, and that's really just to add texture. You can see that thread is now textured on the hook shank, and I'll pick up my articulated section here and draw those two ends back together. So I'm going to catch these at the bend of the hook with just a few really very light turns. I'll draw them up on top, and I want to pull those up. You can see how that back section is now elevated. It's lifted up. I've got it fairly tight. And I'm going to tighten those thread wraps down, and I'm going to come forward over both the ends of the spider wire, about 2/3 of the way up the shank, and then I'll come in and I'm going to trim these two tags so that they're short. I'll now fold those back and wrap back over them. And again, these thread wraps are all good, tight, solid thread wraps. And as I work to the bend, I'm going to keep my thread real short and put one turn behind the other and really jam those wraps up tight. So what this does is it makes this joint very tight here, and that's on purpose. What I want is I don't want this back hook to be able to come around and touch the front hook. So those beads sort of act like a chain, and they'll keep that from coming around and fouling on the front hook. I've still got plenty of side-to-side action in this fly, but it's not going to come around and foul. I'm not worried so much about the up-down action. There is some up, but not much. It's the side-to-side that I'm worried about. It swims just fine. I know people have asked me about it all the time, why I do it that way. That's why I do it. I don't want the tail end of the fly, the back hook, I don't want to come around and snag on the head and foul the fly up. And this method does a really good job of that. The other thing I like about spider wire versus regular wire, braided wire, etc., for an articulation point, is the braided wire in almost every case will eat through your thread. It's just very abrasive and it'll chew through your thread as you fish the fly. And for as much time as we spend tying these flies, especially these really big articulated flies, for something like that to chew the fly up and make it unusable, just doesn't jive for me. So I like the spider wire in almost all cases. So now that I've got that thread base down there, you can come in and usually at this point I'd head cement everything or Zap-A-Gap everything and let it dry and come back and finish. But I'm going to just put some head cement on here right on top of the thread wraps for the eyes, up and down the hook shank, top to bottom. I'll turn that over and get down here between the eyes. Just make sure I've got everything coated. Not really any need for 5 gallons of Zap-A-Gap in there, and I wait for that to dry. You know, about now. It's dry now, dry enough. So no, I don't really wait for that to dry. So now I'm going to bump my thread back here to the bend, and what I'll do here is I'm going to take another hen feather, and down here at the base I'm going to leave a lot of that fluff attached, like so. And I'm going to trim just some little barbs on either side of the stem, right at the very base. I'm going to tie this feather in with the inside of the curve toward the hook shank right here at the bend. I'm going to lift this feather up and I'm going to begin to fold those fibers back. So same thing we did on the body. I've just tied this one in at the butt end. And I'm going to begin to wrap this at the bend. And I just need, 3 or 4 turns here. And what I'm trying to do is get this collar to blend in to the front of the collar on the rear hook. So 3 or 4 turns there, and then I can tie that off and trim that feather out. But save that feather because we're going to use that. Now at this point you're going to be tempted to sweep those hackle fibers back with your fingertips. Remember, there's a hook point back here, so I don't use my fingers to do that anymore. I've only had to tie about 10,000 of these to figure out that I don't want to use my fingers to do that. I use my dubbing brush to do it. Same result, but my finger's not bleeding right now. So I'll sweep that back, maybe take just a couple turns over the front edge there, and you can see how those 2 collars, the collar on the front hook and the collar on the back hook, just fill that seam in between, so there's no joint, no visible joint anyway, between the 2 sections. Now another little pinch of dubbing, and I'm going to apply it in the same way. It actually takes even less than we used on the back hook. I'll start that right at the front of that hackle collar and work forward. I don't really want to come off the end of the spider wire underbody here. Just going to fatten that up. It's just really just sort of a shaggy little section in between. So just started to fill that up. And now I'm going to prepare my feather for the front end. I'm going to take what was left over of that first feather, second feather. So this is just that tip end that we just used. And I've trimmed those little stubs on the base. Same move. I'm going to tie that down good and tight. And this one's getting a little short, so I'm going to use my hackle pliers on it. And I'm going to sweep these fibers back. So just wet fly style fold. Three or 4 turns up here at the front end of the body. So for as complicated as this fly looks when it's all said and done, you're getting a pretty good idea that the first parts of this are really not much more than a woolly bugger. So I'll sweep that hackle back, and again, be careful not to jam your fingers into the hook points, and wrap right back up so that that envelops the front of that dubbing, like so. Now we're going to add some SILI legs, and these are chrome SILI legs. These are gold and black. And people always ask me, why do you put legs on your little streamer patterns? And these are not so much legs as they are fins. There's also, other than the dubbing, very little flash. There's no flash other than the dubbing on this fly. So what I'm going to do here is take these chrome SILI legs that have got some metallic to them, as long as some variegation. And I've got 3 strands, and I've left them attached to each other at their ends. That's just going to make it a little easier to work with. I'm going to lay the center of their length in here behind the eyes, and I'll catch them and pull them to the far side. So 3 strands on the far side, and catch those with a few turns. And I'll pull the other half back on my near side. I kind of pull it down. This is sort of like doing the legs on a pheasant tail. And catch them in place so they're along the near side. Now you can't see it quite here. See if I can give you a little extra view here. There, now you can see my material spring and my vise back here. What I'll do is I'll take these legs and just pin them in my material spring to hold everything out of the way. So that makes my life a little bit easier. Alright, so now we're ready for the head. And this is really the only tricky, unusual part of this fly. Everything else you've probably done before. Nothing special there. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a head and a collar out of polar fiber. Polar fiber is similar to craft fur, but it's denser. And that's what I like about it. It's the reason I like it better than craft fur. So polar fiber is a synthetic stuffed animal hair. So it is a nice dense fiber. This is sort of a where they sell this in a ton of different colors. And I think this one might be called shrimp, but they have beige, off-white, tan, cream. They're all usable colors for this fly. There's no magic to the particular color. Alright, to use this polar fiber, what you want to do is I use a bone comb and sort of sweep it all so it's at least all going the same direction. It seems as though this stuff has a natural grain to it, but as it's a synthetic, you could change that if you wanted to. But I've got it all sort of going the same direction here. And what I'll do to form our collar, and you can sort of see what I've done here as I've worked up this piece, is I'm going to take a long bladed, this is a 4-inch pair of, or 5-inch pair of Dr. Slick razor scissors, and I'm going to come in and push it under the fur with the blades closed, like so, and then I'll pick up a clump, and hold it up, and I'll come down and cut that just as close to the hide as I can. Now I can push that out of the way. So what I've got left here are these butt ends. And as you can see here, these butts are denser than the tips. So what I want to do is hold that clump, and again, sharp pair of scissors, I'm going to cut off about the bottom inch or so of this clump and reserve that to the side. Now I've got these tips left, and I'm just going to take and fold these just kind of back on top of themselves, almost in a roll, and that's going to become our collar. So I'll take that and hold the very tips of this and pull out the longest stuff, and then sort of finger stack everything. So I've got a nice neat little bundle that will become the collar of my fly. So there's the collar, and these butt ends are what will become the head. You can see I can kind of bundle that up into a nice, neat, aligned bunch of fibers. Like so. Alright, so now we're going to take that clump that we've got for the collar, and I'm going to measure it back to about the midpoint of the back hook. And you can see I've got it kind of in a sheet here, and I'm going to fold it down around the hook and catch it behind the eyes with a couple of turns, or 4 or 5. And then I'll lift these butt ends up and trim them out. Good sharp scissors make a big difference here. And then I want to wrap down over those stubs and just anchor everything in place. Beware of that second hook. Okay, to create the dubbing loop, you're now looking over my shoulder. What I'll do is I'm going to feed out a bit of thread, and I've got probably 8 inches. I'll just put my finger in the center of this and bring it back up over the hook and then around the base of the loop, and that'll help to close the loop, make sure it stays crossed and closed. And then a few turns. And as I said, I'll catch my dubbing roll in the loop and put one leg of the loop into my material spring. And that just holds everything in place so nothing twists up while I'm fiddling with these fibers over here. So now I'm going to pick up the butt ends of my polar fiber. And you can see those are cut relatively square, although I've handled those a bunch now, so they're a little bit more ragged. I'll pick up my dubbing loop. I'm going to put this inside this dubbing loop between the two strands of thread. And I want to try to keep it as centered as I can as I do that, like so. Now you can see that's a little bit ragged on the edges. With a good sharp pair of scissors, I can come in and clean those edges up. To get to the other side, I'll just twist the loop slightly and square up the other side until it's nice and centered. Once I'm happy there, I'm going to pinch just below the fur. I'm going to spin the whirl and let that twist work up through my fingers. You can see as I pull down and let that twist work until it starts to double. Use my dubbing brush to pick that out into a nice buggy chenille, and I'm about ready to start wrapping that. So now we'll go back on our gonga and wrap that for the head. So I have a pretty specific method of building this head. I'm going to take the first turn of fur right up against the base of the collar, the second turn right in front of it, the third turn is going to cross on the bottom to the front of the eyes on the near side of the hook, come over the top, over the far eye, and down. Then I'm going to come up behind the near eye, diagonal between the eyes, and finish with one turn around the hook at the front. Now you can see my bare hook eye sticking out up there, and I've got actually just exactly the right amount of fur, which I've done enough of these, it's not as hard as it seems, but I've got just exactly the right amount of fur. I'm just on bare thread there. So I'm going to tie that bare thread off behind the hook eye and trim that thread out. Sweep everything back, just make a smooth thread head to cover. And I'll come in with my whip finisher. And trim that thread. Now I'm going to come in with I use a stainless brush here. It's a little bit stiffer than the brass brush, and it'll pull any of that loose stuff out. I'm going to sweep all this fur in the head backwards. And I'm sure you could take this fly just as it is and go out and fish with it and catch fish, but we could do a little better. So I'm going to pop those two legs out of the vise, and like I say, I am really right-handed, but I tie left-handed, so I've got to hold this fly in my left hand to trim it. And I'm going to use the eyes as a guide to trim an angled kind of cone-shaped head. You can see I've just kind of trimmed across the top to expose the eyes. Sharp scissors make a giant difference here. Come across the bottom. Work to the other side. And I know I'm not holding this right out where you can see it, but at this point it's important that I see it. So I'm just making small cuts. I really don't do anything super drastic here to shape this head into a sort of rounded cone with the eyes determining that outside width. So you can see our kind of little muddler shaped head. Finish off the last bit of that collar. I think we're looking pretty good here. One of the things you learn as a tyer, the more you tie, is when to be done. I can sit and trim for way longer than is necessary. You see I'm just trimming millimeters off at a time. That don't make no difference, but it makes me feel better about it, so I do that a lot. You can see our general overall shape of the head there, all the way around. Now since these legs are hanging here, I'm going to trim them, and they're going to come back to about midpoint on the back hook. So I have a little pre-measured spot down here on the bottom, where when I trim them off they come about midpoint on the back hook. Like so. I'll use my brush again to kind of sweep things back, and last thing I'll do is I'm going to color this fly up. I'm going to add a little variegation to it, and I'm going to start with a this is a Prismacolor marker, and this is jasmine color. In America that's called yellow. So I'm going to color the top of the head with this yellow marker, and this is sort of a dirty yellow. It's a dirty orangish yellow. The idea of this color variation of this fly is a baby brown trout, and I know they've got some olive and other colors sort of mixed into them, but the belly of a baby brown trout is that sort of buff cream color, and I fished streamers this color, you know, gold cream colored stuff for years and years. So when I came up with the Gonga, this was one of the very first ones that I came up with to match, you know, the bottom side of a small brown trout, which is in many cases out here in Colorado what big brown trout eat. We don't have a lot of you know, sort of indigenous bait fish. You know, the small trout are what big trout eat in many cases. So you can see I've worked that marker down along the sides, and you kind of saw how I worked it in. And now I'm going to take a sepia colored marker, and sepia is sort of a gray-brown color, and I'm going to form bars across the fly. So I'm going to start just here, almost in front of the eyes, one right across the center of the eyes, and you can see how I'm working the marker, pushing it down into the fur. Then I'll work behind the eyes, and I start way down along the side of the head, and I'll get around to your side of the hook here in just a second. I just got to get where I can see it. Work those bars well down the sides, like so. Base of that collar. I really prefer the sepia color. It's sort of a gray-brown. It's very subtle. It's not overwhelming. There's a color called burnt umber that you'd think would be darn close enough, but boy, it's awfully red. So this kind of gray-brown color is very subtle. And what I'm doing now is I'm holding onto that collar. Let's see if I can do it where you can see it. Holding onto that collar and running the marker across to create those bars all the way up. If you get a little bit on your hackle fibers here along the way, no big deal. Nice little modeling variegation to it. When that happens, I usually try to make it happen on both sides. And then I'll let that dry for just a second and let it settle in, and then I'll take my dubbing brush and sweep back. And what this does is going to soften the edges of that coloration and sort of blend things together. Sweep everything back like so. And then one final little trick that I'll show you. So on the finished fly, if I hold this real still, you can see there's a few little random pieces of fur and bits, and sometimes I'll spend all day trying to trim those out. You can take a cigarette lighter and just singe the ends of that fur, and that sort of compacts the head a bit. Let's see how we did. Looks pretty good. Now you want to do that before, or I'm sorry, after you use the markers. The texture of the head changes a bit when you melt some of those fibers. So do that after the fact, and that just sort of cleans the head shape up. Also makes it hold that shape a lot better while you fish it. You can see that back hook is still plenty of movement in there, dangling back there, ready to grab a hold of anybody that gets close. And that is our finished Baby Gonga. That is a very fun fly to fish, light colored, so it's easy to see in the water. Fish chase it down and crush it. Big fish don't like little fish unless it's to eat. So even if they're not in the mood to eat them, if they get in their territory, they'll come and crush them. So that is my go-to streamer in most cases. It's a nice light fly. It has that articulated movement, but it doesn't tear your arm off to cast it all day. That's one of the great things about it. Really has become one of my favorites over the years. Since we've got our resin sitting here, we'll hit that thread head just a bit. Let that soak in a second. Got a quick shot with our light. And that is Craven's Baby Gonga. I like it. I hope you do too. Take that out and throw it at some fish. Enjoy watching them chase it down and kill it, and don't forget to pinch those barbs, because there's a good chance that one of those 2 hooks is going to end up in you at some point too. So there's my PSA for the day. Thanks for watching. Take care. See ya.